Dealing with other people is likely the most persistent, difficult challenge you face, whether in business or everyday life. When we encounter friction, our natural instinct is to rely on logic. We try to win others over with data, airtight arguments, and debate, assuming reason will prevail. But that assumes we are interacting with creatures of logic. We are not. We are dealing with creatures of emotion, beings bristling with prejudices and motivated by pride and vanity. This is why criticism almost always misfires. When you tell someone they are wrong, you do not change their mind. Instead, you strike a direct blow at their self-respect, putting them on the defensive and forcing them to justify themselves. Relying on arguments and condemnation to influence others is ultimately a wasted effort. It fails because it works against how humans are wired to protect their self-esteem. History is filled with prominent examples of this precise failure. When Theodore Roosevelt returned from Africa in 1910, he explosively condemned his successor, William Howard Taft, for his conservatism. This bitter criticism didn't persuade Taft to change course. Instead, it split the Republican Party, handed the presidency to Woodrow Wilson, and led to one of the most disastrous political defeats in party history. Even the most notorious wrongdoers rarely blame themselves. Al Capone, responsible for some of the most brutal gang violence in Chicago, viewed himself as a public benefactor, an unappreciated servant of the people who was unfairly misunderstood. To understand why we react this way, we can look to Sigmund Freud. He argued that nearly everything we do springs from a single dominant motive, the desire to be great. The philosopher John Dewey refined this psychological idea even further. He noted that the deepest urge in human nature is the craving to be appreciated, not a wish or a hope, but a strict craving. Our default communication style fails because it actively starves people of this psychological nourishment. When we criticize or argue, we diminish their sense of importance. Influencing others requires a complete reversal of our usual approach. It demands that we suppress our own ego and step away from the habit of talking about ourselves and our own wants. The most effective shifts in initial interactions are often the simplest. Offering a genuine smile and making the effort to remember a person's name pays immediate dividends. To that person, their name is the sweetest and most important sound in any language. From there, the focus moves to intense, active listening. Giving someone your undivided attention and encouraging them to talk about themselves is one of the rarest and most validating form of appreciation you can offer. True connection operates on a paradox. You cannot win a person's attention and time by trying to make them interested in you. You only win their cooperation by becoming genuinely, deeply interested in them. So how do you handle inevitable disagreements if arguing and criticizing are off the table? You start with what Abraham Lincoln called the drop of honey principle. Approaching a conflict with a gentle, friendly, and sympathetic attitude disarms hostility. It creates an environment where a person might actually be led to agree rather than forced into a defensive posture. From this softened position, you apply the only reliable method for getting anyone to do anything. You arouse in them an eager want. You pause, look at the situation from their perspective, and talk entirely in terms of what they desire. A young Andrew Carnegie learned this lesson early on. Faced with a nest of pet rabbits and no food for them, he didn't demand help from the neighborhood children. Instead, he offered to name the bunnies in honor of any child who brought enough clover and dandelions to feed them. The children eagerly went to work. Persuasion is never achieved through blunt force. It requires engineering the psychological environment so carefully that the other person independently decides they want to act. The objective shifts from single interactions to the broader responsibility of leadership and driving behavioral change. The behavioral scientist B.F. Skinner proved through extensive experiments that rewarding good behavior is vastly superior to punishing bad behavior in learning. When you praise even the slightest improvement, those positive actions are reinforced and repeated. Conversely, when criticism is minimized, poorer behaviors tend to atrophy simply from a lack of attention. If a fault must be addressed, effective leaders point out their own mistakes first. Humbly admitting that you are far from impeccable allows the other person to save face, making the correction much easier to accept. The true leadership replaces the demoralizing weight of condemnation with the warm sunshine of praise, reinforcing the specific traits that lead to success. If you want to improve a person in a specific respect, act as though that particular trait is already one of their outstanding characteristics. Give them a fine reputation to live up to. When you provide a standard of excellence to maintain, they will make prodigious efforts to improve, simply because they refuse to see you disillusioned. But none of this functions as a bag of manipulative tricks. The human ear easily detects cheap flattery. For these principles to work effectively, they must be rooted in absolute sincerity and a genuine appreciation for the individual. Mastering human relations is a new way of life. It asks us to stop fixating on ourselves, to actively seek out the hidden treasures in others, and to lead with genuine appreciation.